Hello, and welcome to Lion and Mouse Commentary. We're your hosts, Holland
and Tori.
Two best friends as different as a lion and a mouse. Today we're reviewing Hamilton, the Broadway musical, and we'll be ranking it on an objective scale of 0 to 10 with only 2 points allotted for personal taste. Feel free to agree, disagree, or just learn about something new. Just be sure to tread lightly. There will be spoilers ahead. And cut to the intro. Alright, welcome to the Lion's Den. So, for our new listeners, if you're new with us, we'll be breaking down the scoring system by category as we go, but the full breakdown is also available on our website. So, let's get started. So, I chose this category. This is the Broadway musical called Hamilton. If you haven't heard of it, you
Been living under a rock?
Yeah, I was about to say, you've probably been living under a rock. It's been a smash hit musical pretty much since before it opened on Broadway. Some facts about this show. It officially opened on Broadway on August 6th, 2015. At the 70th Tony Awards, Hamilton received a record-breaking 16 nominations and won 11 awards, including Best Musical. It also received the 2016 Pulitzer Prize for a drama. The original Broadway cast stars Lin-Manuel Miranda, who also wrote the musical, Leslie Odom Jr., Philippa Sue, Daveed Diggs, Renee Elise Goldsberry, Christopher Jackson, Anthony Ramos, Oak Onadowan. I don't know how to pronounce his last name. I'm really sorry, my guy. Jonathan Groff, and Jasmine Cephas Jones. The original soundtrack recording album debuted at number 12 on the Billboard 200 albums chart, the highest entrance for a cast recording since 1963. It went on to reach number 2 on the Billboard 200 and number 1 on the Billboard Rap Albums chart. So, this is just a little brief synopsis of the plot of the musical. From Wikipedia, Hamilton details Alexander Hamilton's life in 2 acts, along with how various historical figures influenced his life, including the Marquis de Lafayette, Aaron Burr, John Lawrence, Hercules Mulligan, Elizabeth Schuyler Hamilton, Angelica Schuyler Church, Peggy Schuyler, Philip Hamilton, Maria Reynolds, George Washington, James Madison, and Thomas Jefferson. So, all of that to say, it's a semi-autobiographical play about the life of Alexander Hamilton. The kind of unique spin on it is that it is told in a sung-through musical style with modern music, predominantly rap, as the main musical genre featured. That was not from Wikipedia, that's my synopsis. So, let's get into it. Tori, you can kick us off with the first category.
Okay, so I'm going to talk about Hamilton just for a quick sec. This is something that is very, 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 very familiar to both me and Holland. We have the entire show memorized. We have seen it in person when the Broadway tour came through our hometown. I cannot count the number of hours we have listened to the soundtrack. We've watched it on Disney Plus. All of the things that we could possibly do as fans of the show, we've probably done. So this is a very important show to the both of us. So that being said, jumping into plot and story delivery, 2 possible points. I gave it full points. I think it's impeccable how, from the beginning to the end, every song delivers the next piece of the story. There's really no throwaway song. Every song has a purpose for telling the story of, if it's not Alexander Hamilton, it's another key character of the story. I think each character kind of gets their moment in the grand scheme of things. We get each song kind of flows very seamlessly into the next. I kind of like the way that the show balances Hamilton's like work life and family life, and it shows how they go hand in hand, but there were two sides of him. There was the soldier turned politician, and then there was the man at home, and how his work affected his family life and how his family life affected his work life. And I think that it's interesting to see both sides. I also like how the musical deals with kind of in the thick of the war and post-war, and how life looked for early American history in those ways, and the influence that the nation had from these men and women who played parts of it. I think that the song Nonstop, which funnily enough was the first song that Holland had me listen to. She knew what she was doing because she hooked me in with that song. But it's a great end to Act 1. And it launches us really well into the second part of Hamilton's life, which is like post-war part of Hamilton's life. And we do get to see the influence that Hamilton and other characters had on the early government establishments of the nation. One thing that this musical does a lot is it repeats. There's this big repetition of motifs and phrasing. And I think in some cases that could be a detriment, but it never is in the case of this musical. Two big examples of that are they use the phrase look around at how lucky we are to be alive right now. Multiple characters use that in multiple points of the show and of the story. And it always fits wherever they're saying it, even if the context is different. Another repeated motif or phrase is something was easy, something is harder. Dying is easy, young man, living is harder. Winning was easy, young man, governing's harder. That sort of thing is repeated. And again, these sort of motifs and phrases, they represent, I think, moments in the characters that come out in different points of the story. And it almost gives you like a reminder of like who this person is or what the mindset is at the time. And I think it's very effective. The melodies of these motifs repeat as well. So it's not like just the phrasing or the wording is repeated. It's the melody that's sung to these words is repeated. And I think it's just really, really effective. It's so new, this sort of idea, and I'll talk about that more later, but we have never seen a Broadway show like this. Sure, we've seen Broadway shows that have historical influence. That has happened. But we've never quite had one that delivers that message with very modern musical stylings. Rap and hip hop, I feel like it's something strange to juxtapose with early American colonial history. Like, that doesn't make any sense. If you were to tell somebody who literally doesn't know what Hamilton is, which there's probably somebody out there who doesn't know what Hamilton is, if you were to try to describe it to somebody with no knowledge, I feel like you'd be like, what the heck is this show? But you watch it and it just works. It's like something that shouldn't work, but it does. And kudos to Lin-Manuel Miranda, because he really does tell the story in such an interesting way where your attention is captured. You learn more about these historical figures that I feel like, we've learned about in school or whatever, and you just kind of learn like the bare minimum to just kind of like get your American history in. You don't really think about these people as the men and women that they were, and that they were complex, layered people with faults and shortcomings and downfalls and all of these things, but then they also had really good things about them, and the victories that they had, and sort of the positive influences that they have. I think sometimes we forget that there were a lot more to these people than we may get just sort of like in your basic American history. And I think this musical does such a great job at helping us to remember that these were real people. These were real men and women who had difficulties to face and how they had to overcome them and how they didn't always do that perfectly. So because of that, I think the fact that the story is delivered all in song, I don't really think there's much spoken dialogue. It's like a line or two here. There's never a spoken scene. It's always just like a line or two, and then there's more singing. And in some cases, I find that that's annoying to a lot of people who watch like Broadway shows. Some people are like, man, I don't like musicals because who sings everything all the time? And sure, that's true, but I think it just works so well. It sounds like it shouldn't work, but it just works so well. So for me, 2 out of 2 points for plot and story delivery.
Alrighty. So, and just kind of a little disclaimer here, just because you can't see the sheet that we're reading off of, unless you go to our website, you can look at it there if you really want to do both at the same time. But when we consider plot and story delivery for theater media, we include the musicals, the musical numbers into this aspect of our category because the songs move the plot forward in the area of theater. It's not usually just a gratuitous, song that we're singing as background tracking. It's actually moving the plot forward. The other thing, just to kind of make a point, as Tori kind of already mentioned, Tori and I both were able to watch the Disney Plus Pro Shot version of the original Broadway cast recording. And then more recently, within the past, 3 months or so, we were able to see the play in person. So we're using both of these as our reference, our frame of reference. And we both believe that whether you're going to watch the Disney Plus Pro Shot version or a live performance, our opinions are still valid regardless of what media you're able to experience this play in. So out of total possible scoring of 2 points, I gave this 1.5 points. I think that the fact that this is a sung through musical, that, like you said, very few lines are actually spoken. There's very few spoken as lines of dialogue, is extremely difficult to sell to somebody. And like you kind of said, it just works. Like you're being sung to or rapped to at sometimes for 2 hours and 40 minutes. And yet the delivery of the energy, the energy, the ebb and flow of the musical numbers are such that you get amped up with energy, you're excited, and then you get a little break. And then you're amped up with energy again, and then you get a nice ballad. And it never feels jarring when you transition from one aspect to the other. I think Lin-Manuel Miranda, in writing this musical, did an excellent job of kind of grouping songs together to tell the story. It's almost like there's chapters of a book with a collection of musical numbers. For example, Alexander Hamilton is the name of the first number. From that point through the story of tonight, that's like one chapter. It's about 4 songs, I think.
Yeah, 4 songs.
But it really feels like it's one chapter. The songs flow very seamlessly. And then at the end of the story of tonight, that number, it moves into the number called the Schuyler Sisters. And that feels like the stage has kind of transitioned and now you're in a new scene. So even though you're experiencing the music continuously, it still feels like you're watching scenes of a theater. So it still feels like you're watching a stage play, even though you're almost watching a concert, a performed concert the whole time. That's a very difficult thing to do, and it's just delivered very well. Like you said, there's a lot of callbacks, repetitions. I think that does really well to keep that line where if you're singing through an entire musical, you're following this man's life. It's a biographical musical. It could be very easy to get lost. You're like, okay, well, now who are these people and who is that? And okay, now there's George Washington, but now there's this lady singing, but now there's, okay, who are all these people? It could be very easy to get lost and not know what's going on. But the fact that musically you're having these ties to connect these characters and even the motives of certain characters. For example, there's a time where Alexander Hamilton, or where Eliza, at the very beginning that she's introduced, she sings, look around at how lucky we are to be alive right now. And then later on in the play, Alexander Hamilton sings that back to her with that same sentiment. And it's delivering that story, even though it's like, wait, that's Eliza's line. It's like, no, but you feel the same emotion and you understand the undertones because of that repetition.
You have the context already established.
Right, exactly. I like that the thread of conflict in the play, because in a biographical story, it could be very easy to not have any real conflict in the story because you're just watching a man's life. But the conflict is very good at being external and internal. So you have this external conflict in Act 1 and Act 2 of winning the Revolutionary War and then trying to govern the United States, figure out how the United States should be governed as a new nation. But then you have this internal conflict between your main characters of Alexander Hamilton and Aaron Burr. So with how do I leave a legacy behind? How am I going to make a difference in the world? So I think that having that internal and external conflict help carry you through to care about these characters. I think that's a good story as well. Some of the musicals that I think just are very emotionally gratifying and they really pull you in without fatiguing you are kind of numbers like Yorktown, which is the kind of this climactic end of the Revolutionary War.
Also my favorite song in the show.
And then also numbers in Act 2, It's Quiet Uptown. Just heavy content of a song, and you feel for these characters, yet it doesn't wear you out by the end of it. Just, it's beautifully done. It's very beautifully done. However, I do think there are some things that I didn't give this full points, and a couple of things. I do think lyrically, this musical can be very hard to follow if you're a first-time watcher.
Absolutely.
If you have no knowledge, if you've never heard a song, you've never listened to a soundtrack, and you go in completely blind, you probably would miss about 30%, or less. Probably at most about 30% of the show because it's just very difficult to follow. It's very fast-paced. It's extremely well written, but it is rap. So if you're not used to hearing that genre of music and you go in as like a theater nerd, or your kids told you it was a great show and so you and your spouse went on a date and you went to go see it, you might be lost through the show. Interestingly, I was sitting in the theater about to watch the live version, and this woman next to me was about in her 60s, and she said, well, I did my homework. I watched the show on Disney before I came so I would know what was going on. And it kind of hit me like, that's almost what you have to do, or at least listen to the soundtrack.
When I watched it with my parents, we had to put the subtitles on because both my parents were like, I can't keep up. It's so fast.
Right. And so I think that's kind of a negative. In a way, I can't really give it full points because I think it's such a good show. I wish that you could go in completely blind, completely, deaf, if you will, having never heard anything, and get full enjoyment of the show. That being said, it does make for good rewatchability. I would go see it again and again and again because I feel like I would catch new things every time. Another thing that's a little bit of a negative point, it is a long show. It's like I said, it's 2 hours and 40 minutes long. It doesn't feel that long when you're experiencing it if you're really enjoying it.
And live, you got to throw in a 15-minute intermission to that.
Right. So you're going to give up 3 hours of your time to watch this show. That's a long show. Granted, you're fitting a whole man's life into 3 hours. That's pretty impressive. But it does make it kind of difficult to sit through if, you have an issue sitting through 3 hours. That's a long time. Another reason I didn't give this full points was because, and maybe this makes me a bad Hamilton fan, I still don't know how I feel about the last number of the show. I understand the intent and the message. So the theme throughout the show is, Hamilton leaving a legacy.
Right.
And the message kind of at the tail end is that Eliza, his wife, carries on his legacy. And while I completely understand that concept, it just doesn't resonate with me as the penultimate climax of the play. The song is very grandiose. It's very powerful. The key, there's like 17 key changes in it. It's done very, very well. I don't have any issue with that. And Eliza's talking about, she raises funds for the Washington Monument. She speaks out against slavery. You, meaning Hamilton, could have done so much more if you'd only had more time.
She also continues the legacy of, like, the soldiers that fought with him and stuff like that. She talks about a lot of that.
Right. And, then she talks about what I'm proudest of the orphanage because you were an orphan. And so, and to me, it's like, I understand that the message of the play is trying to tell me that all of Eliza's actions were part of Hamilton's legacy because she's doing that for his legacy. And personally, I don't really buy that. Isn't that shouldn't that be Eliza's legacy? That here she is. Now, granted, Hamilton did amazing things for, America, and he did, his accomplishments should not in any way be diminished while he was alive. And was Eliza influenced by that? Sure, absolutely. Did she care as much about slavery as he did? I mean, I can't give you an answer, but I can't help but think she spoke out against slavery because she was against slavery. Not because, well, if Alexander was alive, he would speak out against slavery, so I'm going to do that for him. I don't know. For me, that doesn't really resonate with me as well. If I'm being completely critical for the purpose of this podcast, emotionally, I love it. I think it's great. But thinking critically, I'm like, that's Eliza's legacy. And now I'm being sold it at the dead end that all of that counts as Hamilton's legacy as well. And for that to be the ending message, I understand the concept of that song is who lives, who dies, who tells your story. And Eliza told Hamilton's story so that he would have a legacy. And genuinely, in historical accuracy, we wouldn't know Hamilton's legacy if it wasn't for Eliza. So all of that I agree with, and I think should be mentioned and highlighted. But when she's specifically when she's recounting these things that she did for the early American nation, I don't 100% buy into all of those things she did is because of Hamilton's legacy. So for me, in watching this and listening to it and seeing it, in both mediums, I'm just kind of like, I'm left a little unsatisfied, which ironically is another song in this show, but I'm left a little unsatisfied because I feel that Eliza should be highlighted, and she was an amazing woman, and what she did was amazing, but I'm still watching a show called Hamilton, which, I mean, maybe I'm missing the point. Maybe the point is that the Hamilton in the musical is Eliza. It's not Alexander. I don't know.
There we go, maybe big braining it.
maybe I've missed the point all along, but here it is. We've watched Alexander Hamilton's life, and then at the end, the person highlighted at the end and put in center stage and having this kind of artistic, which I also don't really get the kind of artistic reaction she has when she kind of like
sees the light.
Yeah, at the end, like there's all kinds of speculation
passes on
as to
whatever it is.
Well, yeah, whatever that is. There's a lot of different speculation, so that's kind of muddy, because different people have said different things. Is she seeing the audience, and that's the legacy that she finally got to see Hamilton's legacy by seeing the audience watching this play, or did she go into heaven and see Alexander again? Like, what is she reacting to? So that's kind of artistic and like ethereal. And then, we've watched all of Alexander Hamilton, and I get that she's carried on his legacy, but we're putting Eliza up on this pedestal like the whole play all along was about her. And maybe it is. Maybe I'm just missing the point here. But for me, I walked away a little more confused and unsatisfied than having that really satisfactory ending of the play. So that's why I gave it 1.5 points out of 2. I didn't take points off. Some people would kind of knock the plot by saying, oh, there's a lot of historical inaccuracies in the play, blah, 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 blah. I didn't take points off for that. I think that you should be allowed to have creative license. You're watching a play where they're rapping about...
Like, obviously there are creative liberties.
They're rapping about the Declaration of Independence and dueling rules.
Yeah.
Like, why are you worried that Alexander Hamilton didn't really inspire Martha Washington's Tomcat's name? Like, why are we getting upset about that? So, But because of that last musical number, that's why I kind of had to give it 1.5 points out of 2. Again, maybe I'm just missing the point of the musical. And, you know, if Lin-Manuel Miranda ever finds this podcast in a basement somewhere, I hope he doesn't hate me. But so that's my kind of overall assessment, 1.5 points out of 2.
Okay. So for characters, that's our next category. Total possible 3 points. I gave it, again, full points, 3 out of 3. So you kind of touch on this. Obviously, some creative liberties are taken. But I'm not mad about it. Do I think Hercules Mulligan was really wearing a beanie in the Revolutionary War? Absolutely not. But do I like it? Yes, I like it. It's very fun. It's very fun, okay? We need to give allowance to this show. It's still gotta be fun. And I think the creative liberties that are taken in regards to the character are most of the time just to give us some more fun. And I don't think that's a bad thing. Could a historian come into this show with a fine-tooth comb and find inaccuracies? Yeah, absolutely. Sure. Even Lin-Manuel Miranda acknowledges that. But I'm not going to take any points away from that. I think it's great. The original Broadway cast, fantastic. Fantastic. And it's like, but don't get me wrong, we saw the touring Broadway cast. They were also fantastic, but there is an impact, I think, that the original Broadway cast had. And I like that about them. When you listen to the soundtrack, you're going to get used to the voices of the original Broadway cast, so you become attached to that. And I think that they do a really fantastic job.
Well, and I think that's true of any musical.
True.
Like, the majority of the time, the original Broadway cast is the one that everybody identifies as the originator of a certain role. I don't think anybody who's a fan of the Broadway show Wicked would ever poo-poo on Idina Menzel or Kristen Chenoweth.
Yeah,
they
right.
kind of birthed those roles.
Right.
So when people that have seen Wicked yesterday, they're not going to in any way say, oh, yeah, well, Idina Menzel and Kristen Chenoweth were just, you know, they're whatever. Like, no, there's credit,
Sure.
but then they also still enjoyed the same cast that performed
Right.
those roles yesterday.
Right. So yeah, I think it's worth noting that, like, the crew that Lin-Manuel Miranda had, and not knowing at the time of creating this musical, not really knowing what the future of the musical would hold, and not understanding the reach that this musical would have, but this cast workshopped this. I think the only member of the Broadway show, like on Broadway, that was not in the workshop cast was Jonathan Groff. He was the only one that came in when it was officially going to Broadway. Everybody else in the main cast was part of the workshop, and I think that's to be commended. They believed in this show before the general public did, and I think because of that, you feel the love and, like, heart and work that these actors have put into these roles, and it's very evident through the show. You know, when we see Renee Elise Goldsberry sing Satisfied, it's like her entire heart is into that character. She is Angelica on that stage, and it's like it's so easy to buy it when everything about your actor on the stage, everything physical and vocal and emotional and even just expressions on their face is 110% at all times, even when they're not speaking. And I know it's theater, so everything is bigger than like film as a medium, but with this cast in particular, it's just, you can feel the care that they have poured into this. And for that, I just really want to give them commendability. I think it's great to see some of these actors playing 2 roles and nailing both of them. You've got Hercules Mulligan turning into James Madison. Completely different, like, personalities, and here Oak is nailing both. And you could say the same thing about Daveed Diggs playing Lafayette and then into Jefferson, and Anthony Ramos playing Lawrence into Philip, and even Jasmine Cephas Jones changing from Peggy Schuyler to Maria Reynolds. That's a big shift. And yet here she is, again, nailing both. And I think it just stems back to my first point of, like, you can tell all of the work and, like, love that each of these actors has poured into this show. And it's more to them than just a role. I feel like it's, you know, a project. Sure, Lin-Manuel Miranda wrote it, and it is his brainchild, and probably nobody will love Hamilton more than he does. But I think next to him, you've got this core cast. And I think they probably love Hamilton almost as much. And it's just so evident. I just keep saying that, but it really is evident. Because of that, as we watch these characters, we really do start to relate to them. We cry when they cry. We cheer when they cheer. You know, we feel nervous when they do. I want to give a huge shout out to Leslie Odom Jr. because this show is about Alexander Hamilton and his life, but it's also very much about Aaron Burr. And the sort of story of Aaron Burr that is often overlooked in American history. We all just know Aaron Burr as the guy who shot Alexander Hamilton. And I appreciate that this show doesn't just start Aaron Burr at that point in the story and weaves his story in with Alexander Hamilton's and kind of gives us a look into the buildup of the decision that Aaron Burr made. And kind of helping us understand, like, how he got there. Of course, we don't agree with the decision, but by the time that Aaron Burr has made the decision and we've watched him through the whole show, we understand how he got there. We see the unraveling and the crumble. And I think it's so cool to see the parallels in this show between Hamilton and Burr. And Burr is literally always just trying to keep up with Hamilton, and he never quite can keep up. He's always a step or two behind, and it's part of the reason that he just, you know, starts to unravel toward the end of the show. But we also see an unraveling happen in Hamilton. And especially in Act 2, it's like we kind of see the arc of Hamilton, and then there's like a downward shift that happens after Take a Break. You know, and then it goes into Say No to This, and then, you know, into all of those things. And this unraveling not just affects his family life, but also affects his government life and the perception that the people of America have on him at that point. And his peers in government start to have on, you know, their opinions of him start to shift. And we see, and again, it's almost like another step behind. We start to see the crumbling of Aaron Burr, and his frustrations just mount and mount and mount. And he looks and sees Hamilton and all of the screw ups that Hamilton has had, and yet he's still one step ahead of Aaron Burr. That would frustrate me. I understand the frustration. You know, do I think he should have shot him in the chest? No, absolutely not. I'm not saying that I think the decision is justified. I'm saying I appreciate the fact that this show gives us two main characters and the parallels of their journey, and how the differences in the two men ultimately give us the ending that we get. And I just think it's a really interesting way to present this historical event. And I think it's a very effective, I know it sort of sounds like a plot thing, but the reason I put it into characters is because if not for the impeccable job of Leslie Odom Jr., I think the involvement of Aaron Burr from beginning to end of this entire show would have not had the impact that it does. So huge kudos to Leslie Odom Jr. Also, his voice is fantastic, and Wait For It and The Room Where It Happens are some of the best, like, songs in the whole show. So I really just think it's incredible. And my last note for characters are another big kudos to the ensemble. And I love that some of the tiny characters that we only have for like like one scene are ensemble members. Mm-hmm. You know, you got George Eaker over here, you got Charles Lee and you know, other kind of characters that are important. They played a role in the history, but we only see them for this one time. So it's like, hey, let's just pull an ensemble member, and they nail it. Like, all the ensemble members, they're just such a fluid extension, I think, of the cast that I don't want to diminish their part in the show in any way. Because sure, they may not all be named or, you know, have consistent lines, but I think each ensemble member is given a moment to shine. And it really just adds, I think, to the sort of wide reach that you feel these characters have. So all of that to say, 3 out of 3 points for characters.
Alrighty. So for characters, I gave 2.5 points out of 3. Overall, I think all these characters are extremely charismatic, and they all fit the world and fill a purpose. There's no character that feels superfluous or unnecessary. They all really fit a hole in the plot, and yet they also feel like they fit in the world and environment that they're in. I completely agree. The casting, the vocal ability of the original Broadway cast, but then even in addition to that, any live show you go to, I feel like it's cast
absolutely
extremely well.
Absolutely.
I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, Tori, when we saw Hamilton, the person playing Aaron Burr was an understudy or a stand-in?
Yeah, he was like a swing or something. He was not the, like, it was just like the Aaron Burr's night off, you know, of the Broadway tour cast that we saw. So the Aaron Burr that we saw on stage was either the understudy or a swing.
Yeah, he did a phenomenal job. Absolutely phenomenal. Like, you would have thought he was exactly the main person that should have been cast from day one. Again, you kind of already touched on it, but then playing multiple characters in Act 1 versus Act 2, the fact that the characters are all intertwined together, they all have relationships with each other. I think the little bit of exception is in, you know, Act 2, there's a little more distinction, separation between, like, Eliza and Angelica versus Jefferson and Madison. Obviously, they're not going to really interact with the women characters, but the fact that they, you know, they all have important relationships with each other because in some way their actions are affecting each other. For example, in Act 1, when Washington tells Hamilton to go home because he's messed up, and he sends Hamilton home, you find out Eliza wrote to George Washington because she's pregnant and asked him to send you home. So the fact that Washington's line earlier when he says, your wife needs you alive, has a lot of weight to it. So I think that's just they did a great job of intermingling those characters together. I think that, you know, the contrast of Hamilton and Burr are excellent. The fact that Hamilton is so ambitious, he is really focusing on what his legacy is going to be. He has a lot of flaws. He has an affair on his wife. He's not really a people person. He rubs people the wrong way. And contrast that to Aaron Burr, who's very much a people person. He's very much a charmer. He says you should talk less and smile more, and he tries to slide in and get on Washington's team just, you know, by bragging on himself and kind of, you know, and then he kind of slides into politics by kind of being what people want him to be so he can get votes, and it doesn't matter if he's true to himself or not. He just wants to succeed. So he wants the success that Hamilton has, but he has a very different kind of ambition towards that. It just really is a good contrast of those two men as you're following, like you said, these main two characters of the play. Washington is absolutely a great character. It's really fun to watch him as this general because as Americans, we know he was the first president. He won the Revolutionary War. He was this great giant of a man. And then you watch him governing and watch him impact the way that he speaks to Hamilton, the way that he speaks to Jefferson and Madison, you know, when he's doing the cabinet battles and things like that. although they're very fun scenes to watch, but you see that this is a man who was impactful as a general, but he's impactful as the first president of the United States. And then segueing that into the song of One Last Time, like that's a powerful song. So Washington as this kind of giant of a man, but then he also has these vulnerabilities that you find out throughout the show as well. Eliza, of course, she's an excellent character, kind of like I already talked on. You know, she stands by him and upholds his legacy at the end, but she's not without human moments throughout as Hamilton's affair comes into light and her reaction to that, her reaction to the death of Philip, things like that are very human. She's very, very human. She's not this untouchable, unapproachable, unattainable version of a woman. She's just a very real woman.
Yeah.
The fact that the characters of Angelica and Eliza, their relationship as sisters together is highlighted very well, I think. You know exactly their love and affection for each other. And Peggy, of course, in there as well with the Schuyler sisters, but then, of course, moving into Helpless and Satisfied, just their love for each other. And then all of that kind of snowballs into a very realistic outcome of Angelica standing by her sister's side when Hamilton screws up and even ruins his family's reputation. I think that John Lawrence and Hercules Mulligan, they're very small roles, but they managed to have such an impact on Hamilton. The things that they say and the ideas they express along with Lafayette are just really well integrated into shaping who Hamilton is and kind of what he stands for. So again, with that kind of intertwining. And then, interestingly, those actors then become antagonists to Hamilton with Jefferson and Madison kind of opposing his views politically in Act 2. So overall, just the way that the characters kind of ebb and flow, they're all very believable, they're very human, they have, you know, realistic feelings and emotions that they just kind of, that I think they portray very well throughout the entire show. One reason I didn't give it a full 3 out of 3 points is because of the nature of this musical. Kind of like I mentioned before, it can be kind of difficult to follow because just of the style and the lyrics and the way that it's all presented. In addition to that, I think that there are times where the actors, I think, have less of an opportunity to portray a lot of depth and emotion in the portrayal physically. Pretty much everything you know about a character is because you were told that, not because you were shown that. So I think that overall, as a musical, you like these moments of reaction and silence and just where it's very physically portrayed. And you don't get a lot of that in this musical because of the nature of it. You know,
and also it moves so fast.
Right.
Yeah.
So I think because of that, I think it is a character aspect. Because of the pace, you're relying solely on what your ears are hearing, not as much what you're witnessing on stage. So one of the songs that I think is a very big exception to this is the song where you find out that John Lawrence dies. It's actually not on the soundtrack. It is featured in the Disney Pro Shot and in every live performance. And where Eliza reads the letter given to Hamilton about John Lawrence's death, and John Lawrence does sing a few lines, kind of that callback to a previous song that you hear. But you're able to really watch Hamilton react to this news because Eliza is verbally reading. She's not singing or rapping. She's reading the letter out loud. And it just feels like a good moment where there's this stillness. There's underlying music and it just seems very still. And I felt like as a viewer, I'm able to kind of take a breath for a minute and just really soak into the physical portrayal of these characters and the physical acting ability of these actors with their facial expressions and their body language, which isn't as easy to find throughout the rest of the play. So for that reason, because that's the only moment where you really get to experience that, I gave it 2.5 points out of 3. Again, I don't think it's necessarily negative. I think it's deliberately because of the style of the play. It's just a kind of casualty of war, if you will, that you don't have as many opportunities. The pace is so quick and you're moving along. You don't really have a lot of time to kind of process what you've just watched, and you don't get a lot of time to kind of really see the portrayal of these characters in kind of a silent, kind of toned down manner.
Okay.
So 2.5 points out of 3 for me.
Okay, so next is aesthetics. 2 possible points. I once again gave it full points. Do I like this show? I don't know. 2 out of 2 points. Okay. So in a show like this, you do not need to change your set. But there is such good use of props, set pieces, lights, and that super cool in-floor turntable that I don't feel unsatisfied with the fact that the set never actually changes. They just move things off and on this set. There's also multiple levels to the set, which I think helps. We kind of have like this top balcony rafter that goes around the outer edges. But honestly, that turntable is so cool, and they use it in so many cool ways. And it's got all the different rings that go different directions, and they can change the speeds and all those things. So cool. They really do help tell the story visually while we listen to the songs. A lot of this is used, I think, it's like the turntable directly reflects the momentum of whatever we're currently seeing. So, for instance, let's go with the song Hurricane. This is literally the boiling point of Hamilton's unraveling, if you will. He's justifying to himself the very embarrassing decision that he's currently making to tell the entire world that no, he did not commit treason, he just committed adultery. So we have this moment where he's monologuing, basically, in song, and you have this wonderful use of light that genuinely gives a stormy effect. You're using the turntables, and the ensemble comes out and they're holding pieces of furniture, set, papers, etc. They're frozen holding these things as the turntable turns them, and it makes it look like a storm, a hurricane around, like a literal hurricane of set pieces around Alexander Hamilton. And is it elaborate? Not really. But is it effective? 100%. And that's just one example. Hurricane goes straight into the Reynolds pamphlet, and it's probably my favorite transition in the whole show. And it's because of the use of that turntable and how they use it. And everything just gets very chaotic. There's so much to look at. The ensemble is constantly moving, while Alexander really doesn't move much at all. But everything's moving around him to kind of portray the chaos that he has now thrown himself into. And it's just super effective. If you were to count the pieces, there's really not that many, but the constant movement makes it look like there is. On the converse side of that, I'm just going to continue. This kind of goes along with the point you had earlier, where like sometimes chunks of songs are like a chapter. So you kind of have like Hurricane into the Reynolds pamphlet, and then it goes straight into Burn. And Burn is like the converse of everything we just saw in the previous 2 songs. So Burn is very quiet. The stage clears. All we have is a bench, a lantern, a bucket, and Eliza holding a letter. That's all we've got. Where previously we had all the ensemble members holding something. There was stuff moving all over the place. And now all of a sudden it's like we have this quiet moment. It's incredibly full of, like, I don't want to use the word desperation because I don't think it's exactly perfect for the, I guess, passion that you're hearing from Eliza because she's incredibly hurt and embarrassed. But there almost is a little bit of desperation, especially as she gets into like the later verses of the song. But the blocking is so simple. And I love seeing the quietness behind that. She's not loud and chaotic. She is the opposite of that. And it almost kind of shows what Hamilton has kind of ruined in that moment. He has ruined the calmness that is Eliza. The sort of, I guess, constant that she is in his life. He has marred that. And I think visually, aesthetically, we get to see that. And seeing the difference just in those seconds when the entire ensemble clears in like a matter of like 2.5 seconds, it's impactful, I think. And there's a lot of uses in the entire show. That's just one example, but I think there's a lot of uses where it really does use an empty stage when it should and a full stage when it should. I'll give one more example and then I'll kind of move on. That'll be pretty much it for me for aesthetics. The song Dear Theodosia is literally 2 men, 2 chairs, 2 spotlights. The end. There's nothing else going on. They don't move much. I think Hamilton goes from like standing to sitting in the chair or something like that. That's like the only movement. But the song is still really good, and you don't feel like I'm bored while you watch that. It's just an effective means of they have a story to tell and a very clear emotional drive, and we don't need to complicate that. We don't need to muddy that any further. So because of that, full 2 out of 2 points for aesthetics.
Alrighty. Well, I also gave this 2 out of 2 for aesthetics as well. I do have to say, I don't think that the Pro Shot, the Disney Plus version with the original Broadway cast recording, really can compete.
I agree.
With a live performance.
I agree.
I recommend you should watch it. Absolutely. I highly recommend watching the Pro Shot. But I don't think that it has the same effectiveness as watching it live. It's just so much better live. The Pro Shot is great. It gives you a lot of close-ups of the cast, and you can see their faces really well, which, you know, if you have a seat in the nosebleeds in a theater somewhere, you don't get that. But, again, like you said, minimalist set. There's hardly anything there. They don't have any fancy backdrops, and they don't need it. It's not like they made a big field for the Battle of Yorktown and they made a big city when they're in New York, and you know, so the fact that it's almost like they trust the intelligence of the audience to understand, I'm watching these people in a battle. Now I'm watching these people in a cabinet meeting. Now I'm watching these 2 people have a duel outside somewhere. They let the audience just experience things and use their dang imagination. One thing that I find so frustrating, I was able to see some newer productions of musicals. I'm not going to name them because I don't want anybody to feel like I'm bashing them. But the use of digital screens as a backdrop has gotten so prominent in theater today. And I personally don't like it because most of the time it's not done well. It's just kind of lazy. And I love the fact that Hamilton doesn't use a single screen. They don't have a single real backdrop piece. It's kind of this worn looking building that these people are performing in. It looks like they're performing it in an old theater. I like that there's a large balcony. They really use that balcony. Sometimes it's a little tough. It makes it hard to look at because you're not able to see everything because there's people on the balcony. They're acting their hearts out just like the people on the stage. But they make full use of the space. This is one of those few musicals. I really shouldn't say that, but it's a musical that really utilizes the stage. It utilizes the full space of the stage. The ensemble becomes the props. Right. And becomes the, like the hurricane, like you were just saying. The ensemble is becoming the hurricane. The ensemble is becoming the group of British soldiers fighting the American soldiers. So the world is built with these very minimal props, and then the ensemble fills in the gap. And I think it's just done really well. There's an ensemble member who literally is the bullet out of a gun.
Yeah.
And visually, you just believe it. You don't need anybody to hold your hand and put up some fancy technological piece or prop. You are allowed to just see with your own eyes and interpret it like a theater viewer. And they really allow you to use your own imagination and use your own intelligence in those kinds of aesthetic choices. And I really, really appreciate that. The lighting cues are so good. Because the set's so minimal, the lighting changes with this red lighting. The lighting, I think it was in the room where it happens, is just amazing. The lighting...
They even use it humorously, like in one of the King songs when he says, "I'm so blue," stomps and the light turns blue.
Right.
Like even humorous ways, but it's effective.
Right. And it tells the story. It's almost like the lighting sometimes is a character. And it's just really fun to watch. You kind of already touched a lot on the turntable. I love how they use that to convey movement. So Aaron Burr's walking down the street. He's walking on the turntable like it's a treadmill. So he's not moving in space at all, but his legs are moving. And you can watch that. You get that visual movement of walking. They go to row a boat and the characters sit down on the turntable and motion like they're rowing a boat. And they move across the stage in the motion, so that movement is used really well with the turntable in really simple ways. The other thing I kind of implemented into aesthetics was just really the clean segues between songs and how the songs change, the styles change depending on what character is singing. So the use of musical style is really good. I know that could kind of go into plot and story delivery as well. The styles differ between Hamilton and Burr. Hamilton usually is very fast-paced rap songs, and Burr sings these very, very soulful ballads. Like, I think that's a great musical choice with the musical numbers. George Washington's vocal performance is very different from Thomas Jefferson's.
Yeah.
And they utilize that as a character distinction more than just the movement of the plot, moving the plot forward.
Mm-hmm.
The costumes, I think, are just phenomenal. Their silhouette is just gorgeous when the lighting changes, especially for the women and the dresses that they have, and the military uniforms for the Revolutionary War scenes are just really cool looking. The way that the uniforms change, the way that the costumes change from Act 1 to Act 2. You see Hamilton in a very plain clothes jacket, then he transitions into a military uniform, and now in Act 2, his outfits are very mid to upper class because he's moving up in the ranks. Aaron Burr's outfit changes from Act 1 to Act 2. You see the status of these men changing. It, again, is an implement to tell the story instead of just clothes that this person is wearing. One thing I did not take points off, but I do think it's important to mention if you are a traditional theater fan or a theater goer, or if you're just expecting a normal musical so that you wouldn't be disappointed. The choreography in this show is very, very minimal. It kind of mirrors the sets. So there's no tap dance number. There's no big, ballet number. It's very, very much intentional artistic movement to further tell the story or become...
It's more formational than choreography, I would say.
Yeah. I mean, I would classify it as choreography, but it's really not what you expect when you think of stage theater choreography. So if you're a theater fan, a traditional theater fan, and you're expecting show tunes, you're going to be disappointed. And if you're expecting a tap dance number at some point or some big ensemble, jazz hands, you're going to be disappointed because there really isn't any big musical number. In kind of speed watching this show for the purpose of this podcast, I think the only number that is close to being a typical show tunes theater number would probably be The Room Where It Happens.
Fair. Okay, yeah.
choreography does get a little more dancey.
It's the most jazzy number, I think, of the whole show, so that would make sense.
Right. And then the song What Did I Miss is a little show tunesy, but again, the choreography is more so filling the set and setting the stage for you rather than an actual dance number. So I know there's a lot of people out there who really enjoy theater because of the dance aspect of it. So I didn't take points off for it because, again, it's a stylistic choice. You can't really have a tap dance number. Well, I guess you could, but it'd be very hard to have a tap dance number over a rap song, though rhythmically, maybe.
Honestly, Lin-Manuel Miranda would figure out a way to do it.
Yeah, but if you're expecting a big jazzy show tunes number with jazz hands,
you're not going to get that. This is not Newsies.
Right.
It's just not.
So, but I did not take points off for it. The other thing that I think I did not take points off for, but I think that it's not negative. It just means you need to watch this more than once. There is a lot to look at. Like I said, they use that upper balcony. There's a lot of movement going on the stage. I think the more times you watch it, the more you're going to see. But for a first-time viewer, I think that it definitely could be very chaotic to watch. In addition to the audible stimuli of the music, visually there can be a lot of stimuli as well. So it's hard to kind of hear everything that's going on and visually take everything in that's going on. Again, it's not a negative thing. I didn't deduct points off it in this category, but just kind of as a cautionary
something to
note.
Know. Yeah. Okay. So personal taste and preference is the next category. 2 possible points. I once again give it full points. Are we seeing a pattern? I have to say, so I used to say I did not care for rap or hip hop at all. And this show has expanded that interest in me. Is rap and hip hop a genre that I listen to excessively now? No. But I think I have genuinely found a new appreciation for that musical style from this musical. Of all the things to make me appreciate that genre more, a Broadway musical is not the thing that you would expect, but here we are. And I have come to see the merit and the value of that kind of musicality, the talent of those who can do it well and quickly while still having great diction and pronunciation. These are things that I have come to appreciate. This show now means so much to me. And again, it's one of those things that it doesn't make sense that it works. And it does. And I think just seeing the value of all of these strange puzzle pieces fitting together and working so seamlessly has become something that I genuinely can say I love at this point. So because of that, I have to give it 2 out of 2 points. It's something that I find myself revisiting all the time. It's something that I still enjoy just as much now as I did in the beginning. And I think I don't really foresee that changing in the future. I think that this is in my top 3 Broadway musicals and will stay that way for a very long while.
All right. I also gave it 2 points out of 2 for personal taste and preference. It's an extremely well done show. For one, I think it's amazing that it's an untold story of American history, and I think it's extremely fun to watch. I also completely applaud the creators and the continued productions of the show that managed to tell a story about humans with flaws that doesn't romanticize their flaws. It also doesn't villainize it. This show does not villainize Aaron Burr. It portrays him as a human being, even though he's, as he says, he's the villain in your history. He's still just a man who made choices. And, so they don't villainize these characters. They don't romanticize these characters. They don't politicize these characters. And it's so refreshing to just see a good story told about characters that could very easily
be polarizing.
Or manipulated to fit somebody's agenda, or be, used to tell a specific message. It really doesn't. It kind of tells the message that Alexander Hamilton may have wanted told, which is that just, this is my story, and I wanted to leave a legacy and make an impact, and so here's a story about him and his life, and the other people in his life as well. The cohesion of the songs, the costumes, the sets, the choreography is so immersive that it doesn't feel like as long of a show as it is, which I usually find when I'm watching theater. I love watching live theater, but I do usually find that sometime in that second act, there's a few musical numbers that I just kind of zone out for, and I'm bored. And there's never a dull moment while you're watching Hamilton.
Right.
You can use that for your marketing if you want to. So, and it's also so engaging that there's enough that you want to see it again, because like in just kind of speed watching through the pro shot version, I'm noticing choreography that I hadn't noticed before, and I'm noticing the way that these characters are moving up on the balcony, like the way that they're reacting to things that are happening and passing things around. One thing I forgot to mention in the aesthetics that I just think is so great is like they use the orchestra pit for part of the show. True. as part of the characters and the world that they're using. Like, that's just so unique and fun, yet it fits the story that they're trying to tell at that time. Another part I also really enjoy about this is that the live and the original cast, the other part that I also really enjoy is that the live productions that are still going on and the original Broadway cast, like Tori has talked about, they make those roles their own while still being true to the characters of the original, cast and material. So you don't feel like you've missed out by not seeing Lin-Manuel Miranda play Hamilton.
Right.
We watched the live production, the touring production. There were moments in that show where I felt like the Hamilton that I saw did something that I liked better than Lin-Manuel Miranda's version. And I think that Lin-Manuel Miranda would be 100% on board with that, because that's the way the stage play was designed, is so that every person that steps in that role can take a little piece of themselves and put it into those characters while still remaining true to the original source, the source of the show and the play and the story. And I think that just overall, it's just so enjoyable to watch, and it's such a good story. And I think that for a lot of people in America, because we're Americans here, there's so much of our history that just doesn't get talked about. And so it's nice and refreshing that there are still people that want to kind of revitalize history and revisit history and tell it in a really fun and enjoyable way. And I think this musical does that very successfully. So I thoroughly enjoy it. 2 out of 2 points for me.
Yeah. Last category is creativity. 1 possible point. I also gave it full points. So, in case you can't math, that's full 10 points for me. But let me just talk for a moment about the creativity. Who would have thought that a rap about early U.S. history would be so amazing? And not only amazing, but influential. It's only been on Broadway for 7 years now, and I feel like, what is a legacy? That show in and of itself is going to have a legacy. We look at some Broadway productions that have been on Broadway for a very long time. We had our episode about The Lion King Broadway. I can foresee Hamilton being another show like that has a very long-running history, that continues to impact generations to come, that, people bring their kids to 10 years from now still. And I think that it's because it did the unthinkable, which was put two things that shouldn't go together, and it just executes it so perfectly. So for that, full points in every category for me, and that gives me a 10 out of 10 points.
Alrighty. I also gave it 1 point for creativity, full points for creativity. You touched mostly on what my kind of points were, but, it's an American history musical, which is weird to begin with, like boring, who wants to watch that? And then it's a musical that's actually it's not all, but for marketing purposes, it's all rap. Well, that's weird. And in addition to that, which we didn't really touch on, because I think the kind of polarizing issue of this has kind of died down, especially with the success of Hamilton being so widespread. You have predominantly white characters being portrayed, like historical figures being portrayed by an ethnically and racially diverse cast, which before this was kind of unheard of.
Right.
You wouldn't think of George Washington being played by, typically in a lot of the casting, a really tall black man.
Right.
But it fits. It works. For a show like this to have so many, just those three areas where it could have really gone wrong or been really disliked and unaccepted, it's soared. It's succeeded. Right. It's kind of the epitome of high risk, high reward.
Yeah, for sure.
Huge risks at this. And I think that all of that is just should give it full points for creativity. Like you said, I think this is going to leave a legacy. It's going to be, it is an iconic musical. It really is. And I think that it's respectful to history, but it's so fresh. And to be perfectly honest, this is my take on it. And I think there have been some, articles kind of written about it. But right before this musical was debuted, they were talking about taking Alexander Hamilton off of the $10 bill and replacing him with somebody else. I think maybe Harriet Tubman was one of the ideas or something like that. But they were going to erase Alexander Hamilton off of the $10 bill. And I remember at the time thinking, my brain going back to my 12th grade government and civics class, thinking, he was the Secretary of the Treasury. He was our first treasurer. He, of all people, should be on a dollar bill, a bank note. You shouldn't take him off. And then Hamilton comes out and all that talk of taking him off the bill just goes away. I mean, maybe I'm just overreaching here, but it's very possible that this musical saved Alexander Hamilton from being taken off the $10 bill. And to be perfectly honest, if he had been removed from the $10 bill, I don't think anybody would have ever talked about him anymore. His legacy probably would have died with him being erased from currency, because other than him being on the currency and being told in your,
history,
education, he was the Secretary of the Treasury. He was the first treasurer.
He also got shot by Aaron Burr, and that's like all you get. Yeah.
His legacy really is living on because of this musical, and that alone is just iconic. That is a milestone in not just kind of American history, but in the medium of art, is that art really can have a big impact on people and highlight these founding father characters as really the human beings that they were. Yeah. So total points for me, 9 out of 10 points. I know it's not quite 10 out of 10.
That's okay.
But it's equal to what I ranked The Lion King on Broadway. So I feel like that is,
This is the first episode that either of us had a perfect score.
Yep.
And I gave it to Hamilton, which is, I think, fine. It's fine with me.
Were you expecting that when you went into this ranking?
I was not, to be honest, but I'm fine with it. Genuinely.
All right. Any closing thoughts before we go into the lightning round?
No.
All right. Lightning round questions. So, favorite song?
I did mention this, but The Battle of Yorktown is my favorite song. Probably second favorite would be The Room Where It Happens.
Cool. I think mine changes a lot. Some of my top favorite songs, I really like Nonstop. I really like Blow Us All Away. I really like, I like My Shot. I think all of those kind of high energy songs I really find. I like the 10 Dual Commandments. I think it's so interesting. I used to really dislike Hurricane because I thought it was boring, but the more I listened to it, it just really grew on me. But I think my favorite that I always come back to would probably also be Yorktown.
Okay.
Favorite costume?
So I actually am going to say Mariah Reynolds' dress. And I think it's because it has such a motif. Like that red kind of like reappears throughout Act 2 as kind of like a symbol of Hamilton's, I guess, for lack of a better term, like temptation or sin. So I think her in that red dress is just very, just what it represents, I feel like is really impactful. So I'm going to go with her red dress.
I am not sure what my favorite costume was, and I wrote these questions. So, I think it's really stereotypical, but I think I just really like the Revolutionary War uniforms.
Okay.
I think they just look really good.
They do.
think George Washington's Revolutionary War uniform would probably be my favorite just because his silhouette in that costume is so commanding. He's got the hat on, he's got the sword. The way that the character is able to really use that sword as a prop is just really good. So I think I would probably say George Washington's Revolutionary War uniform, especially in the number of right-hand man, and it's just done really well.
Okay.
All right, Act 1 or Act 2?
This is super difficult. Super difficult. But just by a hair, please know this is very close. Just by a hair, I'm going to say Act 2.
Really?
Yeah.
Why?
I think Act 2 gives us more moments to understand the humanity behind the characters. Where Act 1 does give us a ton of high energy, and I think we root for the characters a little heavier in Act 1, but in Act 2, I think we're almost given just a ton of moments where we can kind of see like the men and women behind the establishment of our government. So for that, I say Act 2.
Cool. I would say Act 1.
Okay.
And I think because I like that you're rooting for these characters the whole time, and I like the dynamic between Burr, Hamilton, and Washington in that first act, and then the camaraderie between Lawrence, Mulligan, Lafayette, and Hamilton kind of at the beginning and setting up that kind of brotherhood that they have. I just think it's just really neat and unique. And in Act 2, you really don't have any of that camaraderie because now you have everybody butting heads because, governing is really hard. But I like that in the beginning there's a lot of unity because they're all working towards kind of the same cause of independence. So I just find it more fun. And usually the songs that I re-listen to the most frequently are from Act 1 as well. So
Okay.
Next question. Favorite character?
This one is also very difficult for me, but I think I would say overall for the whole show, my favorite character is probably George Washington. I think it's just he's kind of like he's a good backbone, I think, that goes through both Act 1 and Act 2, because there are a lot of great characters in Act 1 that we don't see in Act 2 and vice versa. And then other than like Hamilton, Burr, and then like Eliza, I feel like you have George Washington that kind of stays, not stagnant, but he's reliable.
He's steady.
He's steady. And I think he's a good foundational mentor to Hamilton, and you see that in both acts. And so for that, I think I would pick him for my favorite character.
I think I would, call me basic, but I think I would say Alexander Hamilton.
Okay.
I really like, I find aspects of him that I think I really resonate with, or maybe they resonate with me. I don't know how you would appropriately word that, but I think that watching him struggle, especially kind of in that first act and even in the second act, it just really, his ambition and drive is really inspiring to me. The way that he, they say over and over in the show, like, why do you write like you're running out of time? Like, he always felt pressed for time. And I feel like I feel that way a lot, is that I'm running out of time. I'm running and my time's up. Like, that's how I feel a lot, just in life in general. And so watching him and how he copes with that is just really relatable to me. Maybe that's a little too deep for a podcast episode.
No, I don't think so.
But I find that aspect of him is really relatable. And, the same way a lot of people relate to Burr and his willingness to be patient in things, people find that resonate with them. I find that Hamilton's ambition resonates with me. So I would probably say Hamilton's my favorite character. I wouldn't necessarily want to have his outcome in life
Right.
because that's not great. But the way that he was just able to do so much in a short amount of time is just really inspiring to me. Okay, Angelica, Eliza, or Peggy?
I wish I knew the context behind what I should pick.
There's no context.
Okay.
Interpret it how you will.
Okay. Angelica, because I think she's the most interesting of the three.
Would you care to elaborate?
Nope. Nope. That's it. That's where I'm going with. I think she is the most interesting, and I think she's the most dynamic of the three. So.
You're not going to elaborate on that?
Okay, I'll try. So, we see the three sisters. Peggy is definitely, I think, the most fun or funny, and I think it's just because of her, and Peggy in the Schuyler sisters. And obviously, Eliza is kind of a constant, and I think her steadfastness is to be recommended. However, I think Angelica, we see the most diverse sort of, struggle. It's very well established that she definitely had romantic interest in Hamilton and did not pursue that in favor of letting her sister do that because her sister was a higher priority to her than her own happiness. And yet she still, she gets married and to a very in a comfortable way. But she also is not shy to kind of explain that she doesn't find her husband very fun or interesting, but she's still content with her life and, has to accept that. And so I think we just see a lot of different sides of Angelica, and they're kind of rapid fire. But because of that, I think she turns out to be a very interesting and dynamic character.
I think that's valid. Yeah.
Your pick?
Ditto.
Oh, okay. Do you want to elaborate?
Yeah. Just whatever you said.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah, no, I do think Angelica is a really intriguing character. I really like her relationship with Eliza, and I really like her relationship with Alexander Hamilton. I mean, the way that she, even after he's married, the way that she kind of greets him when she comes home from across the ocean and visits him and wants him to take a break and encourages him and spurs him on in letters that she writes to him, and the support she gives to Eliza. At the end of the day, when it came to between Hamilton and Eliza, she picked Eliza, which is what she did from the very, very beginning. She always picked Eliza over Hamilton. Mm-hmm. So I think that consistency in her is really makes her an admirable character. But then she's also just very intriguing, and the song "Satisfied" slaps. So
it's true.
I mean, you can't deny that. So that alone would make me. I think, actually, interestingly enough, "Satisfied" was the first Hamilton song that I listened to on repeat.
Okay.
So I just listened to it over and over and over again, just because I thought it was just an amazing vocal performance.
It is
by Renee Elise Golbery. Okay, last question. What? Oh, no, it's not the last question. I keep skipping down. All right, next question. Would you vote for Burr or Jefferson? And I'm not saying historically, I'm just saying in the play, if you were one of the ensemble members that got to vote, and the only information you have is Jefferson and Burr in the play, who would you vote for?
I would say Jefferson, and it's for the reason that they give. Jefferson has beliefs, and Burr is very vague. And so I think if I was given the choice, I would go with somebody who I knew where they stood.
Yeah, so. I would agree. I think that it's very clear that, and Hamilton's endorsement, I think, is a big statement to that, is right. That he never agreed with Jefferson once, and they fought over and over, and yet he would rather endorse Jefferson. I think that holds a lot of weight. So If I was a character in the story, I would probably also vote for Jefferson. All right, last question. What historical musical would you like to see in this same style?
Another character?
It could be another character. It could be another event, like a historical event or time frame. It could be kind of as broad or as narrow as you want to make it. So if you kind of had to pick another historical musical setting or character that you would want to see, in this similar style, who would you want to see?
I feel like I might have a spicy answer, but it would be really interesting to see the because obviously Lin-Manuel Miranda does a ton of research into creating something like this. So I'm going to go with my spicy first answer, which came into my head, which would be like sort of the life of Richard Nixon. I think could be very interesting to see. So I know that could be maybe polarizing, but I think that would be interesting to kind of see the research that goes into that and how that would look, kind of seeing like the life and story and eventual downfall of Nixon.
Yeah, I don't know what individual I would necessarily want the musical to follow, and I think I would really, and I don't know, maybe it's too overdone. Well, I don't know. I'm kind of torn between two. I think one that would be, if we're sticking with American history, especially because, the Middle Ages, like that'd be kind of cool. But if we're sticking with like American history specifically, which we don't have to, but I think one that would be really cool would be the Great Depression. Would be a really interesting time frame.
Okay.
I don't know who it would necessarily follow, but that kind of era would be really interesting. Maybe not a political figure that I would necessarily want to see, but somebody that was impacted in that time frame. Or another one I think would be really interesting would be in World War II, the battles that took place in the Pacific. I think would be really interesting to see.
That would be very interesting.
Because that was just so, like, a lot of times in World War II, a lot of the highlight is on the German front.
Right.
The
and not
war
so
against
much on
Germany.
the Pacific side battles.
Yeah. So I think that could be really interesting.
That would be very interesting.
I'm
for it.
And I think that both of those would kind of be really interesting in the similar style of Hamilton.
Absolutely.
Musically.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, thank you guys so much for joining us on this episode. We look forward to having you back next time. Remember, you can always follow us on our social medias. We have Twitter at Lion and Mouse Pod, and Instagram is at Lion and Mouse Podcast. Our website is lionandmousepodcast.com, where you can also find our rules of engagements and notes from each episode, including this one. We also have a suggestion box where you can tell us what you'd like us to review next, and we really do take those seriously, so please feel free to drop something in for us. If you like, you can also support us on Patreon. You'll receive exclusive gifts and content for that additional support if you so choose. And also, please, guys, if you like what you heard, give us a 5-star review on your podcast platform of choice. It really helps us out. It encourages more accessibility to the podcast. It kind of lets us know that you like what you hear. Or if you don't like it, you can let us know that you don't like what you hear. That's fine, too. Anyways, thanks so much, guys, for listening, and we will catch you in the next one.